Welcome to this webinar hosted by the Pennsylvania Association of Notaries, PAN. The title of today's presentation is Ron, What You Need to Know About Act 97 of 2020. My name is Brian Crocker. Completing the panel of PAN instructors is Catherine Senko and John Morensel. We will begin with a housekeeping video, move right into the presentation, and then have time for you to get answers to your questions. Please do not enter your questions during the presentation. When you do enter questions, please only enter them once. The webinar will last no longer than 1 hour. We will entertain additional questions by email. Let's begin.
Hi there. Welcome to one of PAN's webinars. I'm glad you could join us today. Let's go over a few housekeeping items before we start with the presentation. Before we start, we recommend using Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox for your internet browser when participating in our webinars. Those seem to work best with connection and functionality. If you don't see the chat box on the right-hand side, make sure you click on the 3 white dots in the red box. That will expand the chat box onto your screen. Make sure when you're sending a message in the chat that you set it to Send to Everybody mode. Also, if you're asking a question, make sure it's set to Q&A mode. Next, you will want to make sure you check out the Files tab. This is where we will have files available to download for you. You can find the files by first making sure you click on the word File. Then, you will click on the up arrow on the right. That will expand the File tab up, where you will see all the available files. The same steps you just did to find the files, you will follow to find the weekly icebreaker poll. This is just a fun poll we like to throw together each week to get the webinar started off on the right foot. You will see at the top of the chat box, in yellow, a sticky note with the instructor shared email address. We will put this email up usually about 10 minutes after the webinar starts. You can email us if your questions didn't get answered. And lastly, if you're having connection issues throughout the webinar, we ask that you do not contact our customer service team. Unfortunately, they cannot assist you when it comes to connection issues in the webinars. What you can do though is, click on the reconnect button at the top of the screen. This usually resolves any lag or freezing of your screen. That wraps up our housekeeping items. Now on to the presentation.
Last April, Pennsylvania temporarily allowed remote online notarization for all notaries during the COVID-19 emergency and 60 days after the governor lifted the emergency declaration. On October 29th, Act 97 amended the notary law, making remote online notarization permanent in Pennsylvania. Remote online notarization occurs when the notary is in Pennsylvania and the customer is in a different location. The notarization is performed using approved audiovisual technology. Although both involve an electronic document, electronic notarization and remote online notarization are not the same. Electronic notarization requires you demand the personal appearance of your customer. When notarizing as an approved remote online notary, personal appearance is accomplished when you meet with the customer remotely using approved audiovisual technology. Before you perform remote online notarizations, you must first become an electronic notary. Submit the application online. The process is free. No additional training is required. You must choose at least one vendor of approved audiovisual technology. Purchase the technology directly from the vendor. You must notify the Department of State which vendors you will be using. There is a list of approved vendors on the Department of State's website. It should be noted that Skype, FaceTime, Zoom, and Teams alone are not approved remote notarization vendors. You should research the different vendors before applying to use their services. The cost and the use of approved remote notary solutions vary. Some are e-closing and lender-oriented, while other solutions may be better for different types of transactions. The following 4 conditions must be met to perform a remote online notarization. 1, the technology must allow the notary to communicate remotely with the customer in real time. The technology must allow the notary to determine the identity of the customer. The technology must allow the notary to identify the document in their presence as the same document being signed by or containing a statement made by the customer. And the technology must make an audio-visual recording of the notarization. We will address each of these conditions individually. The entire remote online notarization process is done in real time. The notary and the customer can see and hear each other without any delay using the approved audio-visual technology. The technology must make reasonable accommodations for people with vision, hearing, or speech impairments. The technology must allow the notary to identify the customer. There are 3 ways to identify a customer when notarizing remotely. The notary may use their own personal knowledge of the customer as a method of identification. The notary may use a credible witness to identify the customer. The notary may use 2 different types of identity proofing processes or services to identify the customer. All of the remote notarization technologies approved by the Department of State have 2 different types of identity proofing processes or services built in. The technology must allow the notary to identify the document in their presence as the same document being signed by or containing a statement made by the customer. The technology must make an audio-visual recording of the notarization. The recording must include all interactions between the notary and the remotely located individual. The recording must be retained by the notary or someone acting on behalf of the notary for at least 10 years. Although the notary needs to be in Pennsylvania at the time of notarization, the remotely located customer may be anywhere. If the customer is not in the United States, the Notarial Act must relate to a document that will be used in the U.S. The notarization must not violate the law in the foreign country. It is not the notary's responsibility to make sure that foreign laws are not violated. A notarial certificate is made up of a venue and the notary's statement. When performing a remote online notarization, the venue is determined by the location of the notary, not the remotely located customer. The statements for remote online notarization are the same as you would use for any notarization. The notarial certificate must be modified to indicate that the notarization was performed using communication technology. The requirement is met by adding the statement, "This notarial act involved the use of communication technology." The notarial certificate and the notary's signature and stamp must be affixed to or logically associated with the electronic document. This information can be displayed in different ways, depending on the vendor and the document preparation software that you've used. All notarizations must be recorded in a journal. A notary is permitted to have a separate journal for paper notarizations and for remote online notarizations. Some of the technology vendors include an electronic journal. The law requires that the electronic journals be tamper evident. Pennsylvania recorders are not required to accept electronic documents that have been remotely notarized. Recorders may accept a paper copy of a remotely notarized document if the notary certifies that the paper copy is a true and accurate copy of the electronic record. In summary, remote online notarization is permanently approved in Pennsylvania. Keep in mind, you're able to do this, not required to do a remote online notarization. To notarize remotely, a Pennsylvania notary must become an electronic notary and use an approved remote online notarization technology. The technology needs to meet strict requirements. The notary must be in Pennsylvania. The customer can be virtually anywhere, and all notarizations must be recorded in a journal. We will now open up the floor for questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Kathy. So at this point, we are going to open the floor to some questions. Just keep in mind, though, there usually is about like a 10 to 15 second delay from the time you send it to the time we see it on our end. We also will put up our email address at the top of the screen of the chat box, so you'll see that there. If you have a question that we don't get to, please email us. Constance asked, can you speak to those who don't notarize documents but just administer the oath remotely? We don't have new information on that, Constance. Whenever Act 15 took effect, they said that court reporters and stenographers did not need to apply to become e-notaries and use approved technologies. But that was with Act 15. Now with Act 97, that was not addressed. They might address that maybe in their regulations, but they haven't been released yet. So at this point, I don't have any new information for you.
Let's see. How do you get the seal for use remotely? The seal is something that's going to be built in to the remote online technology, which may or may not appear on the document. It may appear differently depending on the vendor you use and the document preparation software, but it's a part of the vendor that you choose.
Alicia asks, can titles be remotely notarized at this time? At this time, we don't recommend that titles be remotely notarized. You do need a tangible copy for the odometer reading.
Stacy says, who retains the 10-year video recordings? That's going to be kept, Stacy, on the technology that you're using. It'll be saved with that along with your journal entries.
Valerie wants to know if you are approved Ron Notary under the emergency, do you need to get reapproved? The answer is no, but you will need to reapply when your commission ends, your regular notary commission ends. We're on Nicole, Kathy.
Looks like her screen might have froze. How about that?
And then you can go on to the next one. Do you recommend a vendor for remote online notarization? Are you there now, Kathy?
Oh, there she is.
Okay, so are you going to do Nicole?
Yes. Do you recommend a vendor for remote notarization? And we don't recommend one vendor over another.
Stacy, and I'll just take Stacy and Jacqueline. They're both fairly simple there. Stacy says, could you walk us through an example? We don't have an example. I know a lot of the vendors, when you do sign up, they will show you an example. We do, however, have a video just kind of walk you through the process of it. It's a very vague explanation, but there is a video. If you click on the Files tab under the helpful links, there's a video. It says how to do a remote notarization. That's going to give you a gist of what needs to be done. And then Jacqueline asks, can you share the presentation? We don't share it where you could use the PowerPoint. But what you can do is watch it as many times as you like. We're going to send you a replay of it, typically 5 hours after this finishes up, and also be uploaded to our YouTube page so you can watch it as many times as you like.
Kayla wants to know, are questions about this act likely to be on the notary exam? I'm scheduled to take mine on Monday. We don't know what's on the exam, Kayla. We don't know the questions. We don't know the answers. Just based on the way they developed it, it's too new, I believe, to be on the exam, but I can't guarantee that.
Joanne asks, how do you apply to be an e-notary? Well, the first step is to go to the Department of State's website, and there is an application you can get from them, and you'll fill that out and send that directly to Harrisburg.
Tamara says, can I have the ebook or the PDF for the Act 97 remote notarization? Yeah, we made that available, Tamara. If you click on the Files tab, it's going to expand open, and you're actually going to see it says Act 97. There's a PDF version right there for you.
So Brenda says, I'm a Pennsylvania notary. I'm working remotely right now from New York State. May I still notarize electronically for my students located in Pennsylvania and around the U.S.? Brenda, you can apply to become a remote online notary in Pennsylvania, but to do a remote online notarization as a Pennsylvania notary, you actually need to be located in Pennsylvania.
Emily asked what vendors are available. If you go to our files and the helpful links document, there is a link to the Department of Websites, and that will give you a list of vendors, or you can go directly to the Department of State's website, and they have an active list of e-vendors and remote online notarization vendors.
Catherine asks, is an electronic journal required for Ron, or could you use the hard paper style journal continue to be used? Either option. I would say if you want to continue to use the paper style, that is perfectly acceptable. If you want to use an additional journal and make one your hard copy and one electronic, that's allowed as well. The electronic style needs to meet all the requirements under RELONA, and it needs to be tamper evident or tamper proof.
Sarah Huffman, I'll take Sarah and Lori. Is the presentation going to be recorded so we can watch it again? The answer is yes. You will get an email later on today with a link to that replay. It's also going to be made available on our YouTube channel. There's a link to our YouTube channel on the helpful links document attached to this webinar. Lori says, I only notarize for the company I work for. We meet up for me to notarize. Can I use an electronic signature from my boss to notarize? If the document is electronic, Lori, and the boss is in front of you, you need to become an electronic notary. It's not actually a remote notarization, but you'd still need to become an electronic notary and use approved software to do that kind of notarization. But in that case, yes, an electronic signature would be okay.
Teresa asked, do I have to be an e-notary or is that optional? No, you do not have to be an e-notary. For remote online notarizations, you do have to become an e-notary first to do the remote online notarizations. But again, remote online notarizations is optional. You do not have to do remote online notarizations if you do not want to. And I can take Denise as well. I have
sure.
in front of me. Can you please repeat the notary statement? This notarial act involved the use of communication technology is what you would want to say. Again, that's this notarial act involved the use of communication technology.
Awesome. So Donna says, is it mandatory to use electronic journal or paper, or the paper would be suffice? And I did cover that the paper journal is okay by itself. You don't need electronic journal. If you want to, though, you can. You are permitted. And Alyssa says, do you have a file where we can download? That was the presentation just given. Brian just covered that, so I'm not going to go into detail on that one there. And Deborah, I'll take Deborah. Is there a difference between Ron and electronic notary? There is. Electronic notarization has been around for over a decade. Electronic notarization is where you're going to notarize for your customer on the computer, but you're still demanding personal appearance of your customer. They need to be in the same room with you when you're doing that notarization. The only difference is you're not notarizing with a pen, paper, and a stamp. You're notarizing on the computer using computer technology. Ron is going to be where they're in a different location, but the notary is in PA. You're using state-approved audiovisual technology.
Rosalie's question is similar to one that was asked previously, but I'll go ahead and handle it. I normally only notarize for individuals at my company. However, my office is located in Pennsylvania, and I am working remotely in New Jersey. Would I be approved to remotely notarize? It sounds like your home is in New Jersey, Rosalie. As an electronic notary in Pennsylvania who is notarizing remotely, you have to physically be located in Pennsylvania. So your current situation would not allow you to remotely notarize in Pennsylvania.
Okay. Theodore asks, what does your client have to do technology-wise? Well, your client would have to have a camera and sound card on his computer or her computer because you do need to communicate with them remotely, and everything needs to be an audio-visual recording. Other than that, I think good go. Of course, being connected to the internet is given.
All right. Where do I find the technology? Well, that is going to be through one of the state-approved vendors. We do have a list of those under the Files tab, under the helpful links. So that's where you can find that. And then somebody asked, is there a reason why Zoom is not accepted as a vendor? Unfortunately, I cannot speak upon that. That would be a question for the Department of State. It needs to be state-approved audiovisual technology, and Zoom is one thing. They say Zoom, FaceTime, Skype, those things are not state-approved.
Let's see. You just answered S. Dean's question about Zoom. Okay. I was thinking about something else and I lost track.
I always do that. I'm always doing that.
The question about journal has been asked a number of times, so I'm going to skip that one. Jane wants us to show the slide again regarding notarial certificate language, but she quoted what it says on the slide, so I'm not sure why she wants to see it again. So the quote that you have there, Jane, is exactly what needs to be a part of the certificate. Any ideas on cost for the vendors? Victoria, we know that some of these vendors can be quite expensive, but unfortunately, we don't have direct knowledge of the cost for each vendor. That's something you would need to work on directly between you and the vendor. And that's the same question from Rob.
Yeah, same question from Rob. Deborah, I chose a vendor, but I was never contacted. So you do want to contact the vendor and make sure that you were approved by them or you're paying them. And then let the Department of State know that you've chosen them. But that would be something you would want to contact the vendor for. And then Patty has costs for the vendors. They're each different.
Julie says, do you have examples of vendors that have the approved technology, a place to start researching? Yeah, I just mentioned that under the Files tab. Click on helpful links. There will be a list of approved vendors, so that's where you could start there. And she says, also, will vendors train you? That is going to be a question for the vendor. I know some vendors, from what I've heard, do show you tutorial videos and walk you through maybe your first one or give you like a little sample what you might be doing. But I'm sure that's going to depend on the vendor. So that's going to be more vendor-based questions in particular to them.
The next one, the exact statement for the changed electronic notary statement. Do you have that off the top of your head, Kathy? Because I don't have it in front of me.
This notarial act involved the use of communication technology, that one, or?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
This notarial act involved the use of communication technology.
Deborah has a question that John answered previously about the difference between RON and electronic notarization. Ira has a comment. It looks like people have to be careful when choosing a vendor, as some nickel and dime you. Again, that's between you and the vendor. Okay, Susie, how are you handling the renewal of notary commissions now that you're not having in-person sessions? It sounds like, Susie, you think that this is something that's required. It is not. Your regular notary commission will be renewed every 4 years, just like it always has been. Then you're permitted to apply for permission to use your notary commission electronically and or remotely. Once you finished your reappointment and everything is updated in the state system, then you can apply to be an e-notary or a remote online notarization and go from there.
And Susie, if you're talking about, just to piggyback, if you're talking, because the way I took the question was she's asking about our live seminars. If that's what you're implying, Susie, you're not required to take in-person seminars. That's one of the options we do. And the only thing you're required to do is take state-approved education. And what PAN does is we provide live seminars, and our online course is also state-approved. So that's something that's a resource you can take advantage of if need be during the uncertain times that are going on right now.
It's tough when you don't answer the question correctly.
No, I read it. Believe me, I've been there. So that's what I was like.
I read it. I'm like,
just to play it safe. I was like, it could be one of two ways.
I'm attuned to that train of thought. We're talking about Ron. We're not talking about education in general.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I think that Kathy, you're up with Alicia.
Alicia, if we use the wording, this Notarial Act involved the use of communication technology and attach it with the title, is that acceptable in the case where one of the owners of the face of a title is not physically able to be present? That's not the intent of Ron. It is when neither is able to be present. And with a title, we don't recommend using Ron because it is do require the tangible copy for the odometer readings, and we don't recommend the Ron at that time for the titles at this time.
We can't say for certain whether it can be used or cannot. The way we read it, and there more information could be released on this, but the way we read it doesn't seem like it could be used for the titling and transferring of like registration and titling, things on that nature. We're not going to advise one way or another. Yeah. Please clarify, although the customer may be physically anywhere in the world, is the PA notary still only permitted to notarize documents for Pennsylvania? The document doesn't need to be just for Pennsylvania. The notary, though, needs to be in Pennsylvania. The document could go technically anywhere, but if you're going to do the notarization as the Pennsylvania notary, you need to be physically in Pennsylvania, whether it's in-person notarization or you're doing a remote notarization.
May I piggyback?
Please.
From my reading of the law, and I could go into a lot of detail, what it says is that the document needs to have something to do with United States business, courts, real estate, but we just say it has to be related to business being done in the U.S. So Barbara says she's not seeing people's questions. Make sure you've clicked on chat. If you click on chat, you should see the questions. Luna privately asked, are there any limitations to fees we're allowed to charge for Ron? It very specifically states in the Department of State's materials that are online that the notary fees have not changed. Those are still the correct maximums for acknowledgments, verifications on oath or affirmation, but it does say you are permitted to charge reasonable clerical and or administrative fees. So that's where you would be able to make up the difference.
And the next question is, can you also use this when doing loan notarizations? If the loan document is online and your customer is remote, you could do this. You could use this technology. If you're using approved technology, yes, you can use that.
Melanie says the software companies require the documents to be uploaded. How can we keep the documents confidential when notarizing? There's going to be state-approved technology where there's going to be security measures in place they need to have in order to be approved by the state. So I'm sure that's going to be, if you go through one of the state-approved vendors, they're going to have security features in place that's going to keep the documents confidential.
Evilise, I think this is a question we answered before, but I'll answer it quickly again. When you renew your notary commission, do you have to renew your e-notary separately, or is it one and the same? No, it needs to be done separately. I'll take another question from Charmaine. If you don't renew with a vendor after the initial subscription, do they send the journal and recordings to us or the Department of State? I actually don't know the answer to that question, Charmaine. The way that the law reads and the way that the Department of State's information on the website reads, that the recordings need to be maintained either by you or somebody who's working on your behalf. So I don't know. That would be actually something that would be between you and the vendor, but they're not going to send them to the Department of State. No.
Lisa asks, are we able to notarize using RON now? Yes, it is legal now in Pennsylvania. There are requirements that we've gone over in the presentation. Brenda says, when in Pennsylvania, if a student presents in person, can documents from another state be notarized? When you're in Pennsylvania as a Pennsylvania notary, yes, you can notarize out-of-state documents as a normal notary.
So Judy asks, if you perform a RON, is that entry automatically recorded in the electronic journal? To answer that question, it would depend on the vendor and if you're using electronic journal through them. Some of them have electronic journals, so that is a possibility. And you still need to enter that entry in the hard copy along with other personal appearance notarial acts. You're not required. I wouldn't recommend keep them in both. If you have two separate ones, if you're going to use electronic journal, I would keep that for my electronic transactions. Then I'll keep the paper one for my paper transactions. You don't need to add it in both. Are both required? No, but that's going to be your call.
What is the advantage of being an e-notary? E-notary specifically, if you want to be able to notarize documents that exist electronically, and you're going to notarize them electronically, and the customer is in your presence, that would be one advantage. As far as remote online notarization is concerned, you have to think, am I going to be notarizing for someone who is somewhere else? If you're not going to be doing that, then it's not worth the time or the effort or the investment to do it. Where do you find the proper technology? There is a list on the Department of State's website. It's actually a chart, has two columns, one for e-notary, one for remote online notarization technology. You can go to the Department of State's website and search for it, or if you take a look at our helpful links document, which is stored under files near the chat box, there is a link to the list of vendors that was updated this month.
Steve asks, for keeping this for 10 years, what if I retire and the backup is on my company's site? The backup should probably be with someone who's acting on your behalf, not just your company's site. And I would think you'd have to download those and turn those into the Recorder of Deeds upon your retirement.
Matt asked, once you select a vendor on the Department of State's website, how long does it take for them to notify said vendor that you've been approved for RON? That is the $1,000,000 question, I'd say. That was a question that's very common, and unfortunately we can't give because every vendor is going to be different. Depends on their staffing, I'm sure. Depends on if they're working remotely or not. So that's going to be something that you need to, whenever you are approved through the state, and then you decide on the vendor, I would just keep up with the vendor to see if they've notified the state that you've been approved.
I'm going to talk about Paula. Oh, you want to do Paula? Paula and Catherine's question?
No, it's okay. It's funny. My phone's connected to the computer and the phone rings, so it took everything off my computer.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, and I was like, okay. So,
Paula wants to know, does remote online notarization provide training? The vendors, I'm assuming they are going to provide you some type of training. I know we've heard feedback from some of our members that say a lot of the vendors actually have videos on their websites that actually show you how these things work, but I can't really tell you for sure. Catherine wants to know, can remote online notarization be used to notarize outside the U.S. In countries such as Canada? The answer is yes. You need to be in Pennsylvania. The customer can be located in another country, but the document does need to be related to business here in the U.S.
Steve asks, what's the cost difference between RON and e-notarization? That would be dependent upon the vendors. Each vendor has a different cost structure. And the fees are the same. Those are set by the Department of State. You can charge an administrative fee. James asks, if there are audio issues during the remote notary process, but video continues to work, would it be acceptable to talk over a phone call while maintaining the video? It's an interesting question. I'm not sure of the answer. I would think all the law says all transactions should be on the audio-video communication with the notary.
And I would say because it's being recorded, it needs to be a consistent, steady flow of the recording of the video and audio. That phone call is not going to be recorded, therefore that's going to be an issue. It was a break in the transaction. It should be a constant flow. My educated guess would be like that. No, that wouldn't work.
No, that would be.
You'd have to start over.
I would think
that's what I would recommend. Absolutely. Charmaine asked, often documents don't include Rolona language above my signature, which I handwrite in. How can this be done with Ron? You might need to add digital wording. That's something that is going to be provided through the vendor, where you might be able to just click and pull it over depending on the act. But that's going to be training that's going to be going through the vendor, or you might have the capability of adding it on there through Adobe. But that's something I'm not really familiar with.
Judy, I'm going to take Judy and Valerie. Judy wants to know if the customer can use a cell phone for communications during the remote notarization. I do know that they don't need to have the same software that you do, but they need to be using high-speed internet. And I don't honestly think that the cell phone is going to be big enough to help to allow them to do it. But again, that's something you would have to ask the vendor about. The vendor may tell you yes. I don't personally know. Valerie wants us to address the limitation on proofing the identity. It seems very cumbersome for the signer. Well, there are 3 ways to identify your customer when you are notarizing remotely. One is to know them personally. Second, you are allowed to use a credible witness, just like for any notarization. And then you need to use at least 2 forms of identity proofing processes. That could be knowledge-based, and that would be, and this is, I think, what you're saying is cumbersome. They would need to answer questions that they are probably the only ones that know the answers to. There could be some type of biometric identification. We don't really know anything specific about that. And there's another where the software, or excuse me, the platform actually looks at their ID and it actually verifies that it's legitimate. But again, I can say, and I hate to say this, it is what it is. You can't change the law just because it's cumbersome for the customer. It's like you can't say to somebody on a regular notarization, well, because it's difficult for you, you just don't have to come in. It's the same kind of thing. There are rules for a reason, and that just happens to be one of the rules.
Okay, Rebecca submitted a PAN application mid-September, but still have no test date. PAN customer service keeps telling me to wait. Is there anything I can do to get the process moving? Unfortunately, the state is processing the applications as fast as possible. I'm assuming you mean your notary application, because the remote online notarization or e-notarization application would be submitted directly to the state.
So when it comes to the testing, because it sounds like she needs to take the exam, a lot of locations, a lot of Pearson VUE locations are closed. If you're willing to travel, some are still open. You could always go on Pearson VUE's website and you could type in your zip code and find it. But if you haven't got an email to schedule your exam yet, then yeah, you're at the mercy of the state, unfortunately. So you're kind of in limbo until the state approves your application. So it's going to depend on the situation. Emily says, does GoToMeeting fall into the same category as Zoom? I would say so. Yeah, I don't believe that's one of the state-approved technologies. Doesn't sound familiar. And then Susie says, how are you handling the renewal of notary commissions now that you're not having in-person sessions? And that's
the same person?
Yes. Well, no, Susie asked that earlier. And yeah, Susie, if you want live education, we're not doing any until beginning of 2021. And even then, even though we have it scheduled, it's not guaranteed during the pandemic. I mean, we're really playing this by ear and we're just going with the flow. But if you need education, you could take our online course, contact customer service. They'd be glad to assist you getting you for our state-approved online course.
All right, I'm going to look at the questions from Lori and Virginia. Lori wants to know, is an audio-visual recording required for both an electronic notarization and RON? And is the recording stored on the software? The recording is only required for a remote online notarization, Lori, not an electronic notarization. And it is my understanding, yes, that the vendors store the recording in their system. Virginia wants to know, is Teams acceptable? Again, only approved technology is allowed, and Teams is not approved technology.
Okay, Sophia asks, will e-notary remain in use after the pandemic? E-notary has been in place actually before the pandemic. RON has just been approved during the pandemic and is now approved as law. So both e-notary and RON are in place in Pennsylvania right now. And for Lucia asks, for normal in-person notarization acts, is use of an electronic journal permitted, or is a paper journal still the only option? You may use an electronic journal for normal in-person notarizations as long as it is tamper evident and it follows the guidelines for the same paper journals.
Awesome. So Matt asked, and it was a private question came in from Matt. It says, what are you seeing as the most common reason certain notaries are doing RON? Is it for deeds, mortgages, etc.? Trying to understand where this is being used the most. Yeah, I would say probably the most is during your real estate transactions, your e-closings, things on that nature. That's where we're seeing the majority of it, to be quite honest. And then Jill says, will all states accept electronic and remote notarization, or only ones who have made it a law, such as PA has just done? Honestly, I can't speak on that. I don't know. I know, for example, the recorder of deeds, in our counties, they're not required to accept electronic filings. Some of them do, some of them don't. So I would imagine just like that, other states, there's probably a lot of them that don't either.
I'm going to address the questions from both John and Ira. Will the state regulate the fees charged for electronic notarization? If you read the material that's online for the Department of State, it says the fee schedules are not changing. The maximum notary fees for each of the notary acts are the same. It does, though, say that you are permitted to charge reasonable clerical and or administrative fees. Ira, does the change allow for wills and powers of attorney through remote online notarization? We had that question on the last session, Ira. I don't know the answer to that question. There are a number of laws involved, not just the notary law. So what I'm going to ask you to do is email that question to instructors@notary.org. We'll do some research or hand it off to somebody who knows the answer and get back to you.
Anne asks, clarify that with RON, the original document is returned to the notary for signature and stamp. With RON, the original document is online and the signature and stamp are online and affixed to the document while it is online.
And then, Jacqueline says, does a PA notary need to physically be in PA to perform RON in PA? Yes, that if you are doing a RON notarization, the notary needs to be located in Pennsylvania. Charmaine says, I had the same question as Lucia. Can we notarize for a person living in another state? The customer lives physically in another state. Yeah, that's okay. They could be in another state, but the notary, when you're doing RON, the notary needs to be in PA.
What do you mean by someone working on your behalf? I mean what it says. That's what the materials from the Department of State says about keeping the electronic recording. It's not more specific than that. It says, through Ron, will our personal stamp be electronic also? The information that's on your stamp will be electronic as well and will be affixed or logically associated with to the electronic document by the vendor.
Melissa asks, I normally only notarize in my office for work only. I have RON capability. If I am not in my office, but I'm working from home in a different county, do I use my home county as the venue or the county of the place the business is? The venue would be where you, the notary, are located. So it would be, if you're notarizing from home, your home county.
Kimberly says, what if the document that you're going to do a RON for has notary wording that is not acceptable in PA? How do we handle this? Kimberly, we would advise that you don't notarize. You can't notarize if it's not acceptable Pennsylvania notary wording. You can have a conversation with your customer and let them know that. You could advise them of their three options. If you want to give them their notary X and they could tell you what they want, you could go ahead and add it on there. And the question came up earlier, how do we add that on there? That I'm not sure. That's going to be something that you'll learn through the vendor. But yeah, you need to have proper Pennsylvania notary wording in order to notarize it.
Rita says, can you please repeat the requirements for court reporters who simply administer an oath to witnesses? There was, in the early days of the pandemic, there was something issued by the state that said that court reporters could issue oaths remotely for court purposes, but it did not need remote online notarization technology. They didn't use any kind of specific software, and they didn't have to apply to become an e-notary. That's the information we still have today. There is nothing specific in the information we've received from the Department of State to change that. So when we know, we'll let you know.
Okay. Tracy asked, does PAN provide any software for this? No, PAN does not provide any software for this. All the approved software technologies are listed on the Department of State's site. And,
Paula says, please clarify RON position. I don't know if you mean our stance at PAN on RON, if that's the question. We don't really have a position. What we're doing today's webinar is because there was a law that was passed regarding notaries. So we just make sure that we keep our members up to date with any changes going on in the notary world. Well, this is a big change. So we just want to make sure everybody's well aware of this. But we don't have a stance one way or another. We're going to go about our business as usual.
Charlotte wants to know, will you be posting this webinar on the PAN website? Not on our website, Charlotte. It will be on our YouTube page, but we will also send you a link later on today to that replay. Donna says, I have a cell that is linked to my laptop. Do you think it would work with the vendor, or do I have to discuss that with the vendor? You've answered your own question, Donna. You need to talk to the vendor.
Okay. Kayla asks, I did my online education for the notary exam in March. Is there any way to access the information I learned for a refresher? How can I review, prepare for the exam without paying for another round of education? Well, you can, we gave should be a link to our tutorial exam. And we also have online tutorials on our webpage. But you should have received a link to the our example exam tutorial exam.
And Kayla, if you are a member, log into the member portal on our website, and then you'll see on the left-hand side, there's a whole bunch. It says tutorials. There's a Relona overview course. There's a test prep course, and a lot of just things in general. It's definitely a good idea to review that because you haven't had education in a while. Yeah, really good idea on that. A whole bunch of thank yous rolling in. You are welcome, and thank you for attending for the people that are leaving here. We got 10 minutes, so we're going to answer as many questions as we can. Again, if we don't get to your question, please email us at the email address at the top of the screen. It's instructors@notary.org. Brenda asks, what exams are you talking about getting scheduled for? Brenda, the notary law Relona took effect back in October of 2017. It requires first-time notaries and notaries that have let their commission expire. They are required to take a notary exam. So that's what we're referring to. Some people might be first-timers in here.
Kristen wants to know, where do you find the electronic notary application? Actually, if you follow the link on our helpful links document to how to become an electronic and remote online notarization, it will take you to the Department of State's website. From there, there's a direct link to the electronic application.
Okay, Catherine asks, is RON acceptable across the United States? No, only certain states have RON right now. Each law is different depending on the state.
Okay. We're on Kathleen, I think.
Kathleen Kuhn. Yeah, I can take that.
All right. No, I got it. So can you use RON and PA if you're in different counties? Sure. Yeah, you could do it within all 67 counties. You just can't do it once you step foot outside of PA. So as long as you're here, you're good.
Tina, I'm going to take a look at a couple of questions because it's just a call. I was tied up with another meeting. Is there going to be another session? Unfortunately, Tina, there is not going to be another session. But like everybody else who was enrolled, you will get an email later on today with a link to a replay, so you'll be able to watch it that way. Ann says, I work for a dealership that does a lot of home deliveries. How would RON apply to vehicle title work for a dealership? Right now, we do not believe that vehicle transactions can be done using remote online notarization. There is nothing specific in the law or the information on the Department of State's website that would suggest that it is possible. So our position right now is this doesn't really apply to you.
Jane asked, was Act 97 put into effect? Yes, it was. That's what this webinar is about. And
a lot of thank yous.
A lot of thank yous and happy Thanksgiving.
Actually, what Act 97 did, if you allow me to piggyback, is it amended the notary law.
Yes.
So it just made some changes, made some additions to the notary law. You're looking for a question here, John?
Yeah, am I up Michelle? Is that where I'm at?
Yeah.
Okay, so Michelle says, will the state site have a list of acceptable states? As of right now, no. Will that update? Possibility. I can't speak on the behalf of the Department of State. If it would come available, I'm sure that would be some information we would love to blog, but we'll keep our eye out for sure.
And I think that's the same question
Catherine had. So, and I don't see any other. What date was Act 97 put into effect? It was passed and signed by the governor on October 29th. That was the day the law was amended, and it was effective immediately. God, I knew something. Sometimes it's amazing. I'll tell you the truth, folks. The first webinar is a little overwhelming because there were so many people on it.
Oh, the questions are flying by.
And we couldn't see the questions because they kept dropping off the screen. So it was a little disconcerting. This was a little more relaxed. Thank you all for being calm and collected with us as we made our way through. There were over 400 people when we started. I think we're down to about 253. If we're going to wait a little bit to see if any other questions filter through. But other than that, we're going to sign off shortly. Just a reminder that becoming an electronic and or a remote online notary is not something that is required of you. This is an option for you. And the only reason we're having this webinar is to alert you to the fact that there was an amendment to the law to allow remote online notarization permanently. It is not something that you need to do.
I'm going to have one of you answer the Shannon's question.
I didn't
where
see
is it?
Shannon's.
I don't see it. I see Paula.
Can you use a POA form to be able to sign the titles for title transferring? Can you use a POA form? If you're asking, can you do a raw notarization on a POA form? The answer to that is we are unsure. That is something, if you'd like to email us, we're going to do some research and get you a definitive answer. If you're just talking about standard, I don't see why not if you're just going to do a standard notarization in person. But if you're talking about Ron, which I assume you are, that's something we'll need to do a little bit more research.
So it looks like, John, you helped this guy get 100% on his notary exam. Isn't that nice?
I'm talking about, Mike. Good, that's good stuff right there.
Do you feel that it's our responsibility to keep up with the new laws? It's really your responsibility to know everything you need to know as a notary, but as an organization, it is our responsibility to notify our members when something changes. Let's see, Paula, I pretty much notarize affidavits all over the world. Do you think I need Ron, or am I okay with electronic notarization? Paula, that's all going to depend. Are the affidavits going to go someplace around the world, or is the customer here in Pennsylvania with you? If the customer is here in Pennsylvania with you, then there would be no reason for you to become an electronic or a remote online notary. But if the customer is going to be remotely located in another country, for example, then the only way for you to notarize for that person would be to become a remote online notary.
Susan asks, when using Ron and credible witness, does the witness have to be with you in person or with the customer? I'm assuming they would be with the customer because they personally know the customer, and then they personally know you, or at least all three of you will be on the screen at the same time. Because they personally have to know both the notary and the customer.
I don't know if it's clear where the credible witness has to be. I could have sworn that I saw something.
It was vague.
Yeah, it was really vague. You want to take Catherine's question, or do you want me to?
Yeah, it just says, I'm sorry, what was the date of Act 97 when it was signed? October 29th of 2020 is when it was signed.
Okay, we already answered Susan's question. And we're coming up on 157 here.
A bunch of thank yous.
We're going to wait a few moments to see if other questions pop in. Just keeping in mind, folks, that it takes anywhere from 15 to 20 seconds after you've sent the question for us to see it. It is the 21st century, but the software is a tad bit slow. Even though we all have high-speed internet in our homes, it still doesn't matter. So.
Again, always grab our email up at top if you didn't.
Does Act 97 speak to the credible witness? It just says you can use a credible witness. It doesn't speak to how specifically they would be used.
I have a feeling the regulations will end up clarifying that, and that's something that's hasn't been released.
And Jane, honestly, if you'd like to go to the helpful links document, you can download a copy of Act 97, and it shows you how it amended the notary law. It's actually a neat format, and I would recommend that. And you can read through it yourself. It's only about a page and a half, 2 pages. Maybe it's a little bit more. Thank you for the thank yous, folks.
Yeah.
We enjoy doing it. We're a little rusty. It's been a while since we've done this kind of format. We don't recommend any particular vendors, Jane. We don't have a relationship with any of them as an organization. So that would be between you deciding, you doing the research, figuring out what kind of business each vendor specializes in. And you want to be careful because you don't want to sign up with a vendor that's not going to help you.
Thank you very much. And happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank yous. Awesome. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up here. I got 159, so
I agree.
Just everybody have a happy Thanksgiving. Stay safe, stay healthy out there, and we plan on doing some more webinars here by the end of the year. So just keep an eye out for your email. we'll keep you up to date as much as we can.
And don't forget our email address, instructors@notary.org. If you have additional questions, or if we asked you to email us during the webinar, that's the email address to use.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye all.
See ya.
Bye.